This is the first time that I went to 3 Joules when it was still on 6th Street. Anybody older than that?
Sorry.
Well, that will be my claim to fame. But anyway, I'm very delighted to be back here. This is a very unique place in my heart. I know it provides a tremendous service for all of Manhattan and for all of you lucky folks who are able to take advantage of the great programs that come through here continually. So what I'm going to do is probably something that you haven't been exposed to before in this center, and that is, so this is a program that resulted, I'm not supposed to call this Cultivating Emotional Balance, so I won't call it that, because I can't do that for a couple more months, actually. But in a couple of months, I will be calling this it'll be a different presentation, of course, then, because now I'm just really outlining this program that will be called Cultivating Emotional Balance, but I can't call it that yet. So now I will call this the 4 dimensions of mental balance known as happiness. So this program resulted after the year 2000 Mind Life Conference on Destructive Emotions. I believe that was in Dharamsala. And that was organized by Daniel Goleman. And near the end of it, His Holiness was so exhilarated by the exchange between affective psychologists, neuroscientists, and all of the Buddhist meditators there, that he said, isn't there some way that we can capture the essence of this and turn this into a curriculum, really, a meditation curriculum that can be easily available then to people in a more secular form. So without dumbing down the meditation program, that was very, very important. Making this serious meditation, but getting to the essence of what it's supposed to do for your life. And so in response to that request, Alan Wallace hooked up with Paul Ekman. So Alan being one of the most renowned Western Gelugpa, Nyingma, Theravadan translators. But he's been in the game since 1972 when he was ordained by the Dalai Lama and studied with the greatest Gelugpa lamas, including Trijang Rinpoche, Geshe Rabten. He was the first Western translator for His Holiness, has written 40 books, etc. So, and is always a very important figure in the Mind Life conferences and that interface between Western science and the authentic Buddhist practices of several lineages. So that doesn't mean that he's not a Gelugpa, but it just means that he's more than just Gelugpa. So he can approach everything from many different angles, including quantum cosmology and neuroscience, and speak with authority on that, as well as having done many, many long retreats and having lived with Genlam Rinpa, learned Shamatha at the knee of Genlam Rinpa, who had spent 35 years in retreat. So he teamed then with Paul Ekman, who's a world-renowned affective psychologist. They created this program called Cultivating Emotional Balance, then rolled it out with an $850,000 study, 2 clinical trials, and now there have been 250 people that have gone through this 5-week training, and I'll be doing that beginning in June also, and then come back and be able to call this Cultivating Emotional Balance. But so the Buddhist assumption behind this pursuit of happiness is that we are unhappy because our minds are habitually unbalanced. And so the whole program then of becoming happy is to recognize the imbalances, kind of the structural imbalances of the mind that lead to unhappiness. And so we are going to be, during the course of this weekend, looking at these 4 dimensions and then being able to do a self-analysis, and you'll find then meditations that are targeted for each one of these. So just to begin with, might as well tell you straight off what those, very briefly, what those 4 dimensions of mental balance are. The first is called cognitive, which in psychological jargon. So I say this, and there are usually psychologists or clinicians or psychiatrists in the group, and I say, this is psychological jargon, and they go, I've never heard that term. But apparently it is psychological jargon. Cognitive, it has within psychology, it means the domain or element of the mind that has to do with intention, desire, and volition. And so you can now congratulate yourselves by recognizing that you know one of the 1,000 most obscure words in the English language. Cognitive is actually on that list. Alan says that he's a word junkie, and this is, proof of that. I think he's trying to make use of, in his books, every one of those 1,000 most obscure words. But it also lends that term, as you'll find out, it's not just trying to be arcane. It's not a term that is intended to confuse, but it's a term that is intended to provide clarity and precision. And we will be you'll understand why midway through tonight, I hope. The second dimension that we'll be working with then is attentional. Oh, and so I might as well tell you that the meditations, so each of these then can be imbalanced. Each one of these dimensions can be imbalanced. And then the whole program is to provide meditations that target the imbalances of each of these dimensions, and then right the imbalances. So the specific meditations within this program that are devoted to righting that imbalance are the 4 immeasurables. Then the second dimension that we'll be dealing with is attention. And we'll be getting into that in great detail. And you could, almost all of tomorrow, actually, all of tomorrow will be devoted to this program then of what in Buddhism is called SHAMATA. So this is sometimes translated as quiescence, or it used to be translated as quiescence, quietude, calm abiding. All of those are so, gobbledygook, rigmarole, that they don't convey the meaning of it by any means. So now, just like bodhicitta doesn't need to be translated anymore, shamatha doesn't need to be translated anymore. You just use the term shamatha and vipassana rather than insight and quiescence, or insight and lamrim chenmo. So Alan Wallace translated the section on quiescence in the lamrim chenmo also. And at that time he was using serenity, but it doesn't even come close really. So now he's just saying use shamatha, and because everybody. So what it is, so cognitive is like one of those words. Think of cognitive as a Sanskrit term. You start out with a term that you've never heard before, and then you can begin to define it for yourself. So it doesn't come with a lot of confusing baggage from definitions that you have heard from the past. And so shamatha, then, we will be doing is the program that is, there's the Buddhist approach to shamatha, there's nothing like it in existence for developing attentional stability and vividness. And it's been around for 2,500 years and has created generation after generation of shamaticians. Not easy to do by any means, but can be done. And I think this may be actually the system that I have found myself immersed in the last few years. I think is maybe the best most comprehensive and effective approach to understanding and developing shamatha that I know of. So we will then be doing, over the course of this weekend, if we had more time. So how many, I should ask right off, how many of you have never been in my previous visits to New York, one of the shamatha or Vipassana trainings? Okay, that's good to know, so that I will maybe flesh out a few things. And obviously it was a long time ago, and you've all had other things on your mind also, and may have forgotten a few things. So the shamatha that we will be doing, I think, then, because I may spend a little more time fleshing out the practice, because it's so essential to get that. And frankly, in the lineage that I studied in for 20 years, it wasn't an important element of the program. And so when I found this approach, I recognized that this is really the reason that they say that all of the masters say shamatha is so essential as a starting point of the progression of turning concepts into realizations, is that, well, we'll talk about it when we get there. So shamatha, we will be starting out with tactile sensations of the breath, and then moving through a progression that leads us to a very intriguing new bridge technique that I'm not taught in, and I'm fair to say has never been taught in New York, I think. But this is something that Alan Wallace just discovered himself last summer while doing a retreat in Scotland, and then he taught it in Phuket at the 8-week retreat that I was at for the first time. And it's a very powerful, effective technique for moving from developing attentional stability to stillness of awareness. And then the awareness practices are what come after that in this whole progression of practices of Padmasambhava called shamatha without a sign, awareness with no object. I don't think we're going to be able to get to that point. So in the retreat that we just did in Massachusetts, we spent, that was a 12-day retreat, and we were able to spend a lot of the time with that practice, and very, very extraordinary practices. But what we'll be doing with the developing stillness of awareness is using a technique of Padmasambhava, then getting into this technique called taking the mind as the path, part of the larger group of practices of settling the mind in its natural state. But taking the mind as the path, where you begin to, with that stillness of awareness, rather than focusing on the constant object of the breath, you now are taking the ever-changing parade of mental appearances as your object, and using that, strangely, to develop shamatha. Because the possibility there is tremendous vividness with this object. So this is all still within the shamatha, which we are using. So shamatha is what we are doing. We'll be using all of that then to work on balancing imbalances of attention within that area, within what I call a dimension. The third dimension then that we are going to be working on, or imbalances in, is the cognitive. And that one I call, so Alan calls it the cognitive dimension. And to me this sounds like view. I think view is a better term for it. So because what you're doing with in the cognitive dimension, so cognitive within psychology has such a wide-ranging meaning. Just about everything dealing with abstract thought to conceptualization, rules of logic, things like that. It's a broad area of mental experience. But here it means something very special, and that is the way it really is our view of the world, what Geshe Michael calls worldview. And so what we are really going to be focusing on here, then, and the whole goal of the cognitive balance then, is to be able to distinguish what the world is presenting to us from our projections onto the world. And don't worry about the, prasangic of, rebuttal of that at this moment. Because what we're doing then is just to recognize our, at least, participation in the world of our experience, that the world doesn't exist out there in the way that it appears with simple-minded realism, and that we are unbiased sense receivers of a world that exists out there in the way that classical physicists believe that it does. So, we have a role in creating our experience of the world. So if we can distinguish that then, so a cognitive imbalance is not recognizing the fact that we are at least co-creators of the world of our experience. And that, of course, leads us to all kinds of problems. And what we will be working with then in the particular meditations, then there is the whole genre of Vipassana meditation. So this then is in the standard approach, the classical recommended standard approach. You would develop shamatha first, or make real serious progress on it, and then really devote yourself to Vipassana practices, to the insight practices, really throw yourself into direct perception of emptiness. But after you have that stable, vivid attention as a foundation. So this was the Buddha's great innovation in Indo-Tibetan philosophy, because shamatha had been there for probably 1,000 years before the time of the Buddha. And so samadhi was a well-known thing, and the Buddha's main teacher on samadhi was renowned. He was supposed to be the best teacher of the day, and had stabilized at the 4th jhana, and the Buddha being able to, which is in the formless realm. And so the Buddha, being a prodigy, was able to do that in about a week. But he recognized that wasn't the end of the game. So his big innovation then, and so there were also metaphysical explanations about the nature of the world at his time also. But the Buddha's great innovation was to use the stability and vividness of shamatha to then have a direct experience of the philosophy, to do Vipassana. And so the Buddha's innovation was the fusion of shamatha and Vipassana. And so that whole realm of Vipassana practice then, the way that it is presented in this program of Cultivating Emotional Balance, uses the Theravada great text, the Satipatthana Sutta, the 4 applications of mindfulness. So you first of all develop mindfulness and, let's say, a shamatha, and then you apply it, the Buddha said, to these 4 domains. And this is what I taught last year and in Brooklyn, and then also in a retreat last year in Massachusetts. Some of you like that. So we're not going to go into that, the 4 applications of mindfulness. What we're going to be doing is because our time is limited, we're going to go right for the jugular. And it is the juggernaut, because this is the big bad one. What we're going to do is try to discover selflessness in one meditation session. That could be. I'm not going to give you your money back if you don't. But people, it's a very, very powerful practice that uses this approach of taking the mind as the path, and using the taking the mind as the path then meditations and adding some serious Vipassana practice to it. But it, again, is something that is not an analytic meditation. It is something that you can discover directly the first time you do it. And that's why it is so powerful. And people after that, long-time meditators in the ACI program, for instance, people's names you would recognize if I revealed them to you, would say after a retreat, I don't see why we wouldn't make that our only practice now. It's like that. So I'm just, in case you're not thinking of coming on Sunday, I just wanted to let you know that this is why you should come on Sunday. So that is the cognitive. What we are trying to do there is balance the imbalances of view, what leads us to delusion, to distorting the way that the world exists. And then the fourth one is the one that everyone cares most about. That is emotional balance. That is what the secular title is all about, cultivating emotional balance. But the very interesting premise of this approach is that emotional balance is a natural result of balancing the previous three. When you balance your motivation, when you balance attention, and when you balance the cognitive or your view, you can't help but balance your emotional life as well. But that doesn't mean that there aren't particular practices there, and that there's not a lot to say, actually, and so a lot very interesting to say there. And again, we will be using the meditation technique of taking the mind as the path then, to delve into emotional life. And the reason that there is so much to say about emotions now as a experience, and to a lot that can be known about emotions, is that since, well, the 90s anyway, Mind Life conferences, a lot of the neuroscientists and affective psychologists that were at those conferences with His Holiness decided that this is what I want to spend my career doing. And so a lot of the world's greatest scientists, neuroscientists, such as Richard Davidson, and affective psychologists like Paul Ekman, and then journalists like Daniel Goleman, have just devoted themselves to exploring this realm of emotions. And so a number of books now on the neuroscience of emotions all have kind of come out of that. So there's a great deal to say about that. And basically what the conclusion is that if you don't balance the three domains that we were going to be dealing with earlier, any emotional balance that you achieve is going to be shallow and fleeting. It's the one that we care most about. Just give me the emotional balance. You know, isn't there one book that I can buy? Isn't there, tell me, who do you see? You know, what's your therapist's name? You seem to be balanced. You know, I'll pay whatever it takes, because that's the one that really causes so much trouble for ourselves and for people around us. So luckily there is a lot to say about that, and a lot that meditation can reveal about our emotional lives as well. So those are the four dimensions. And you won't find these four dimensions actually broken out in the Kangyur and Tengyur. You know, so it's when Alan was putting this together, because he really did it and then invited Paul's development of the psychological framework. He realized through his long years of experience and in his years of teaching, also within the teaching as a PhD in comparative religion, he realized that all of these, the basic genres of meditation within Buddhism could all be included within these four. So these really are kind of a different way of organizing and cataloging the genres of meditation. So it has I am just more and more intrigued with it the more and more I get into it. And I have really devoted the entire last year in getting into it deeply, and the entire next year is going to be getting into it more and more deeply also. So Alan says that whenever he teaches this to, there are rooms full of clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. He always asks them, after he's finished the presentation, do you think that there's anything in the DSM-5, which is the Bible for diagnosing pathologies or mental illness, is there anything in there that really couldn't be described by these 4 dimensions? And they say, yeah, I think so. I think this is really a very helpful way of understanding the whole range of imbalanced minds, and very, very helpful to think of it in that way. And since he first said that, since I first heard him say that, I've just been hearing all kinds of stories on NPR, seeing all kinds of research about how, for instance, schizophrenia can be understood as an attentional imbalance. I won't go into that, but it's interesting how obsessive compulsive disorder also can be understood as an attentional imbalance, on and on. So that's interesting, to think that there's a framework for understanding the whole panoply of mental imbalances and pathologies and mental illnesses, mental distress, because because if you can understand mental problems in this way, isn't it interesting that meditation may have an answer for many of them, applied precisely and directly to particular imbalances. Another way that this is very interesting to me is because I go around to Dharma centers all the time, and a lot of it's always interesting how you fit all of the offerings in a Dharma center into a curriculum, for instance. How do you make sense of it all? Because one teacher comes through and teaches, something, another teacher comes at, and we're teaching ACI 15 next week, and then somebody else is teaching ACI 3, or, then there's yoga, Tai Chi, and all this, the AA meetings, and, it's a real smorgasbord, and it can be, challenging, I think, when a student is presented with the smorgasbord. What is it that I should be working on? How do I know I am getting a complete, well-balanced diet of Dharma? And is there a way of organizing all presentations so that to make sure that within a year, for instance, everybody who comes here would be getting a full, well-balanced diet? So interestingly, this really works, this framework of the 4 dimensions of balance, I think, also really work as a way of organizing a curriculum, a comprehensive, a meta schedule, in a sense. Make sure that there's some shamatha in there. Make sure that there is some of the conative, bodhicitta, 4 immeasurables, tonglen, all of that. Make sure that there is some wisdom practices with the cognitive. Make sure, the vipassana is an important element. And then make sure that the emotional is also being addressed. So that then is a way of creating a really well-balanced program, and in a sense offering it's almost another Lam Rim, a way of stages of the path. So this path then leading to a balanced mind. Wow, what do you know? A trackpad doesn't work with a Band-Aid.
Doug, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So with respect to, you've broken out a few other points under the previous three meta topics. Under 4, would the practices of Tong Lin and the 4 measurables come under emotional balance?
No, those would all be under, did you say emotional? No, those would be actually under the cognitive. And we are going to be doing the practice that we are going to be doing, addressing emotional imbalances with, will again be taking the mind as the path. And so, again, you know, when you think of, well, we'll get into it. So the model is presented in a linear fashion, meaning that you start with the cognitive and then go to the attentional, then to the cognitive, and then emotional at the end, because there's a natural progression. You start with the cognitive, so you might, if you hear the term conation, that is the noun. The cognitive is the, I guess, the adjective. So the cognitive balance is what we start with, because that is what really determines whether your practice, it sets a course for your practice. So it basically determines whether your practice is virtuous or non-virtuous, whether it is leading to happiness or away from happiness. So you know that here in New York, real estate, it's location, 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 right? And now East Point seems to be, or Greenpoint seems to be the location, and I'm sure that every block is location here in Manhattan, you know. But it makes a big difference which location you happen to be in. You know, when you sell, how much, whether you're going to be able to retire and do retreat for the rest of your life or not. But so in Buddhism, the 3 most important things then are motivation, motivation, motivation. Because this is really what is going to determine the outcome of your practice. This is why, so motivation determines the results that you get from your practice. It's that important. This is why the Lam Rim basically is divided by the motivation that you bring to the practice that you're doing. There are definitely different practices that are in each section also that are designed for, but it's all broken out based on your motivation. So our whole approach to meditation also, the results that we get are going to depend on the motivation that we bring to the practice. Why is it that we are doing this practice? My personal prophecy is that it's a good thing you guys are getting, I hope, a bigger building or a bigger place when you move.
It depends, it's all location, location, location.
Yeah, isn't it? Okay. Well, because my prophecy is that in 5 years, meditation is going to be bigger than yoga.
Yeah.
And so there were already 18 million people doing yoga in North America. And that's old information, you know, that was 2010, I think. The challenge is going to be able to get meditators to buy the outfits, though. I'm sure it can be done. T-shirts, we can sell a lot of T-shirts with different logos. Mantras, different mantras on T-shirts or something. But so why is it? How many? Because I know there are a number of New York's best yoga teachers here. What percentage of people? Your classes are probably different. They're not typical. But what percentage of people coming to your classes are doing it for benefits that Patanjali or Master Swapmarama outline the potential of? 50%? You think? Less than that?
I would say that for the last 15 years, 100%, and going forward, I don't know.
Ah, that 100% of people had that motivation.
I like to think that.
Well, okay. I think your studio is very unique.
That's why we are closing.
Yeah. So anyway, the point that I was going to make is
Less than half.
There's a minority.
Yeah.
Certain places in the city and certain studios within the city you're going to find that probably people go to a studio because it's just a workout, and they're doing it for health benefits, to be attractive, to feel good, the undeniable health benefits that go along with it. So there'll be something like that also with meditation, because the health benefits of meditation are being documented daily almost in the mainstream press. So certainly just about every week. And then every month you see a cover article in magazines ranging from Time to Scientific American to Nature to on and on. It's every mainstream journal now wants to get, is covering the story, the benefits. So if that's your motivation, that you are going to get tremendous results from it. So just for just a brief survey, because I have a lot more data on this. Probably one of the most prominent articles was the cover of Life magazine, or that one now, Time magazine, probably about 8 months ago now. No, more than that, a year ago now. But again, about the benefits of meditation. And one of the startling things there was the recounting, and I looked this study up, a study by the American Medical Association. So you can't think of a more conservative organization really. And that was a meta-study of the previous 10 years of research on the health benefits of meditation. And the conclusion of this, the American Medical Association concluded that for depression, anxiety, and visceral pain, meditation was as effective as medication, without the side effects, with only positive side effects, in fact, and nothing but really negative side effects for all of the opioids, etc. And then another cover article, Scientific American, November 2014, titled The Neuroscience of Meditation, How It Changes the Brain, Boosting Focus and Easing Stress. As suggested by, the conclusion says, by the growing compendium of research, meditation may be effective in treating depression, chronic pain, cultivating an overwhelming sense of well-being. 3,000 articles on the website PubMed, that's a government website devoted to medical research. 3,000 articles on the health effects of meditation. It goes all the way down. So it all started with mindfulness-based stress reduction, when lowering blood pressure was the target. So now it has been discovered the effects of meditation go to the cellular level and even to the genetic. And so there is Cliff Sarin, actually, at University of California, Berkeley, colleague of Alan's, who designed a trial for what was called the first SHAMATA project in Colorado about 12 years ago now. But so there were people meditating for 6 months, and then batteries of research done on that. So Cliff Sarin discovered one of the more interesting things was the effect of meditation on this enzyme called telomerase. And so telomeres are at the end of genetic chain or a string of DNA and are kind of govern or have a big influence on replication of cells. And every time the cell replicates, the chain gets, the telomerase or the telomeres get shorter. And until eventually the telomeres are gone and the cell then basically stops dividing. And it governs, the telomeres govern the accuracy of the replication. So there is an enzyme then that actually rebuilds the length of these telomeres called telomerase, and that was found to be 30%. Meditators after in the 6-month study increased the rate of their level of telomerase by 30%. So the conclusion of the research, this was published, stated that it looks like this could have a profound impact on aging at the cellular level. There's also then cortical thickening, meditation being the only thing known to promote cortical thickening, especially in the prefrontal cortex, an area that as we age, cortical thinning, especially of that area, is just a natural byproduct. It's thought that perhaps that cortical thinning may be associated with dementia, loss of cognitive function, etc. When I read that 2 years ago, I think it was, for the first time, it was interesting synchronicity that I saw about 3 weeks after that, another piece that said that the largest sector of spending in the healthcare delivery system now in America is for dementia and complications of dementia, outstripping heart disease and all stroke, all that stuff. So the largest, because people are living longer with brains that are declining and falling apart, and requires a lot of care. And so the largest single area of healthcare spending in the United States, boy, put those two together, the insurance companies having an interest in preventing or forestalling dementia are going to be sending people to 3 Jewels with a prescription to learn meditation. So you can see, anyway, that there are a lot of reasons to meditate. But your motivation is going to determine the results that you get. If that's your motivation, that Alzheimer's runs in my family, I think I'm going to take up meditation. There will be benefit. His Holiness, when he was asked, what do you think of mindfulness-based stress reduction and the popularization of mindfulness for its strictly secular benefits, just health benefits, no mention at all of Dharma. He said, well, Buddhism is all about relieving suffering wherever you find it. So that's good, relieving suffering. So if meditation can relieve suffering, promote healing, why not? Of course. Just don't call it Buddha Dharma, because that's something else. Don't reduce Buddha Dharma to meditation or to mindfulness or to even shamatha. It's so much more than that. It's one element. So the motivation that you bring to the practice is going to determine the results that you get. So this is why then that we need to work, first of all, with our motivation to develop cognitive balance, because this is going to determine why we develop mindfulness when we get to attention, because as we'll talk about, attention is a mercenary. Mindfulness is mercenary. There is nothing of the 51 mental factors. Mindfulness is said to be ethically neutral. meaning that there's nothing, your practice of shamatha is not in itself virtuous. It is not producing good karma. It depends on the motivation that you're bringing to the practice that it's going to determine. So someone who is strapping on a vest with plastic explosives, Kenapak or whatever is the choice these days, and walking into a crowded marketplace in Iraq, Iran, Syria, wherever, if that's happening, those people have stable, vivid attention, guaranteed. We might envy the stability and vividness of their attention, but not what they're using it for. So it's mercenary. That's why we need to really focus, first of all, on assessing for ourselves what is the motivation that I bring to this practice. So to begin with, the conative, like all of the other dimensions, when we talk about imbalance, can be imbalanced in three different ways. And Alan drew this schema from Tibetan medicine. He was a translator for the Dalai Lama's physician for a number of years and lived with him for a year and had his life saved by this physician once. And so he has some understanding of Tibetan medicine and a lot of admiration and faith in it. And so he then adopted this basic taxonomy, really, from Tibetan medicine, and that is that things can be out of balance in three ways. You can have too much, too little, or out of whack. And so adding some psychological jargon to that, it would be deficit, hyperactivity, or dysfunction. So those are the three imbalances that we're going to talk about and address in each of the dimensions that we're going to be examining and practicing in. So the conative deficit means that you would be in apathy, meaning that you just have given up caring about being happy. Because this is what the whole point of this approach is, to develop authentic happiness. So I should mention, again, one of the undergirding premises of this approach is that we are unhappy because of imbalances. Happiness is the natural result of a mind imbalance. And the way that happens is that as you balance the mind in these four dimensions, you eliminate the obscurations that are veiling a natural happiness that you possess, that your mind has a quality of happiness, actually. And that may sound a little suspicious to Gelugpas, but is that an inherent quality of the mind? I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to say, don't take my word for it. Experiment, run the experiments and discover for yourself whether that's true or not. Don't let anybody tell you the nature of the mind. But run the experiments. So what you do in this approach, you use shamatha to develop the contemplative telescope, or microscope maybe is better, but you develop a very powerful observational tool, and then you use that tool to run experiments on the nature of the world, the nature of your mind, meaning you do vipassana. And then, as the Buddha said, what you are after is the truth of your own experience. It's Buddhism, as the Buddha outlined it for the Shravaka Yana anyway, is very, very empirical. And using that empirical approach, the Buddha called that the direct path to nirvana, meaning that you can use that approach very directly, to, and very effectively, to eliminate mental afflictions. That's not bad. I'm not saying that's the end of the story by any means, but that's not bad, to be able to eliminate your mental afflictions. Because then everything else becomes a lot easier. Because the mental afflictions, of course, depend on delusion. So eliminate that one, the Buddha said. So we're talking about cognitive deficit. So the basic premise again is that when you eliminate the imbalances, you eliminate the obscurations that are veiling the natural happiness of your mind. And that gets interesting. What structure of the mind would be naturally happy? We'll go there later, Sunday. So the deficit is, perhaps you have been disappointed. You have tried to be happy in the past. You have tried relationships, you have tried career, you have applied to 4 different graduate schools. So it's just nothing but, gotten unsatisfactory results from everything that you've tried. So maybe the disappointment then leads you to just give up trying. So in this system, that would be a cognitive deficit, meaning that you don't believe that tomorrow actually could be any different than today. That today's unhappiness is somehow an unchanging thing, whatever. But you stop caring about being happy. So that would be a cognitive deficit. Another cognitive deficit, so disappointment is one very effective way for leading to cognitive deficit. Another way is with the belief that happiness is hardwired. That actually happiness is a result of my genetic endowment. And some people are just hardwired to be happy. My grandfather was unhappy, so this certainly wasn't the case for me. For me, it goes the other way, telling my story. My grandfather was one of the happiest people I have ever met, so I have a natural advantage. But that's as mistaken, obviously, but that doesn't lead to a cognitive deficit. So I am going to give up trying to be happy because I'm damned by genetics. I am Jewish. I am Norwegian. Whatever. So I might as well give up trying.
Norwegian, Jewish.
There are other nationalities that specialize in worry and unhappiness and gloom also. It's not just those two. And that's only a caricature, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very, inaccurate, unfair caricature. But we can caricature ourselves that way. My grandfather, my parents were unhappy, so it's obviously I see a genetic pattern there. What possibility is there that I could possibly have authentic happiness? So that would be a cognitive deficit, something to get over in order to make any progress whatsoever. Cognitive hyperactivity, on the other hand, is having a powerful goal, being highly motivated, but it is unbalanced and unbalancing because it blinds you. You are obsessed by this goal, and so it blinds you to the effects of your obsession. So think that, let's just, talk about another caricature. How about somebody who is devoted single-pointedly to their career? I can remember when a friend of mine, at one point I was headed to law school and then decided, luckily I was saved from that. But a friend of mine who did go to law school and then was telling me about her career afterwards said, I'm working 80 hours a week. At our firm we consider 54 hours part-time. So that, every career has if you're going to be successful in your career, every career has its version of that. Either acting, filmmaking, medicine, whatever. There's always everyone has a version. If you're going to get to the top, you have to be blindly, obsessively focused to getting there, because only those people make it to the top, where I want to be. So you can be blinded then, because what is the reason that you would devote yourself so single-pointedly to that? There's a belief that that's going to lead to happiness. And you are blinded then to the obvious experience in that, the money, the status, my experience verifies what the research shows also, that those actually have a very small impact on reported happiness. And while I am single-pointedly focused on those things, the mistaken belief that those things lead to happiness, I have sacrificed my relationships. I have sacrificed my peace of mind, etc., my time, exercise. Those are things, especially relationships, the quality of relationships, are what correlate most powerfully with happiness. But I've sacrificed those, but I'm blind to that. Because of this single-pointed obsession. So that would be called, in this system, cognitive hyperactivity. A cognitive I said cognitive. Conative. So that would be cognitive hyperactivity. And then the cognitive dysfunction is actually desiring things that are harmful for us. Think of addiction. There is something, so a powerful desire that you can't say no to, that is harmful to you. So that would be a motivational, cognitive imbalance of dysfunctional imbalance. So we can, one of the important things about developing cognitive balance is that we have to develop cognitive intelligence also. We need to be able to distinguish what leads to authentic happiness and what is leading away from it. So I'd like to read to you two different quotes about happiness from people that you probably respect. Albert Einstein said that, quote, "Well-being and happiness never appeared to me as an absolute aim. I am even inclined to compare such moral aims to be the ambitions of a pig." Okay, and then this is what His Holiness the Dalai Lama had to say about happiness. Quote, "I believe that the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. Whether one believes in religion or not, whether one believes in this religion or that religion, we all are all seeking something better in life. So, I think, the very motion of our life is towards happiness." The ambition of a pig, or what animates the motion of life? What's going on there? So who is it that we have to stop respecting? Einstein or His Holiness? Or are they actually saying the same thing? Is the contradiction only a surface contradiction? Obviously they're talking about two different approaches to happiness. What Einstein is talking about, being the ambitions of a pig, is what probably more accurately called hedonic pleasure. And what His Holiness is talking about, we'll call authentic happiness. So now you can really begin to distinguish, and this is what cognitive intelligence needs to do, is to distinguish between temporary or hedonic pleasure and authentic happiness. So the hedonic pleasure is stimulus driven. You can think of it as what the world gives to you. And so this is always going to mean that you need the stimulus present to feel the pleasure. And when the stimulus wears out, then the pleasure is going to wear out as well, because the pleasure depends on the stimulus. And this is the kind of happiness that Madison Avenue wants to inculcate in us, right? This is the meaning of happiness. And this is its mecca here in New York City. You know, luckily there is a lot of other things going on here, but one thing that you just can't help but notice is just the amount of avenues for pleasure that there are. Here, every street corner, there's, you know, a restaurant that, you know, I want to try sometime, and etc. You know, the shows and on. The pretty people that, boy, would I like to meet you, etc. You know. It's just one thing after another, you know, New York. So if that actually is a cause of happiness, if the stimulus, if the hedonic is a cause of happiness, is it then always the case that it should be the case, you would think, that more is always going to provide greater happiness, that more of anything is going to provide more happiness? So one of the interesting and longest running research projects, I think, in all of social science has been done every decade since 1920. And this is a survey of people's happiness around the world and how that relates to gross domestic product and how changes in gross domestic product influence reported happiness. And so what the research has found in every decade that it's been done is that beyond a very low level of gross domestic product, that happiness doesn't budge, reported happiness. So that figure, in today's terms, in a term that is called adjusted purchasing power parity. So adjusting currencies and time, you know, so that you can get a figure that makes sense for today. $10,000. Beyond a purchasing power of $10,000, that you're not going to be more happy. So basically, if you've got a roof over your head and you're not starving, maybe $10,000 isn't going to do it in New York. But you know what I mean. It's not, you just think of it like that. If you've got a roof over your head and you're not starving, $100,000 is not going to make you more happy. Beyond this level of $10,000, even in Japan, in this century where there have it's been a 5-fold increase in GDP, no reported increase in happiness beyond that $10,000 point when they reach that. So beyond that basic level of the hedonic, then it's other things that begin to become factored in that begin to determine happiness. Things like the quality of your relationships, relative degrees of political freedom, etc. But we know that when we think about happiness, that the temptation is to think of it as a checklist of things, that when I get these things, then I will be happy. So, you know, if you're starting out, it could be the education at the good school. You know, so, okay, check, got the degree. Okay, Now the career. Okay. It's going to require 80 hours a week for a while, but okay, check. Then now that I have the career, now I can afford the boyfriend or girlfriend that I want, because this one, the one that I want is, I can't afford right now. Check. I'm not talking about myself. And then the two children, check. So it seems like that. A checklist of things that you are just going to, acquire these things, and then the result of that, of course, this is what Madison Avenue has been preaching since Madison Avenue was invented right after World War I. What do you do with all these ad agents that were all about drumming up war support? Well, let's sell products. Okay, that was how it all got started. We're going to have to sell things to people that they don't need. Okay, how do we do that? Well, differentiation. Okay, how do we? There's a lot more that could be said about that, but just as we basically realize when you devote yourself to that giving yourself to that pursuit of happiness is like taking a taxi around the block. You pay the fare, but you end up where you started. Right? It doesn't lead anywhere. It's not a path. So Gautama figured that one out when he was 29 and he left the palace. He had everything, right? He was heir to the throne, a well-run kingdom, loved his parents, had a beautiful queen, or princess, his wife, perfect young child, boy, everything. All he had to do was just to continue doing what he was doing, and he knew that he would grow old and die, and leave a well-run kingdom. I'm sure he knew that. But he realized that it was just a taxi cab around the block. It wasn't going to lead anywhere. And so he decided to give it all up and wager it on a possibility that there was more, that there actually was a path to authentic happiness. So curiously, because of what he discovered and what his motivation, his cognitive balance, when he walked out of the palace, that wasn't even a heroic act. Because does it require heroism to jump off a burning ship at sea if you don't know how to swim? Did it require heroism to jump off the World Trade Center? There just seemed to be no choice. It's not heroism. You're left with no choice. But to recognize that is not what I'm going to devote my life to. It is just acquiring these things that provide some pleasure but provide no happiness. Authentic happiness, then, is, if you think of hedonic pleasure as what the world gives to you, authentic happiness, then, is what you bring to the world. The Greeks had a term for this authentic happiness, eudaimonia. So in the terms of Plato, this was a very, very important concept for both Plato and Socrates. And in their terms, this eudaimonia is well-being gained by development of one's highest capacities in accordance with the highest virtue. Augustine called this happiness a truth-given joy. So there's something about this that if you're going to experience this kind of happiness, requires seeing some truth also. Truth is a very important part of this type of happiness. what we'll call authentic happiness. And just as there is authentic happiness, there is authentic unhappiness. And so if, let's say pain, hedonic pain is stimulus driven, meaning that when there is a needle in your arm or whatever, I feel pain. So, or when there is a, dislocated fracture, compound fracture, I feel pain. So that is hedonic pain. It's stimulus driven. So does that mean then that happiness is the absence of hedonic pain? Eliminate all hedonic pain, and you will be happy. No, we know that. And when you discover that, when you discover authentic unhappiness, meaning that you are unhappy and there's no damn reason for it. You have everything on your checklist. Got the last one right there. And I got the last one right before I went to the gun store. How many times have you heard stories about that? Maybe even know people who have done that. Got everything that they wanted, and then they were so disappointed that if that's all there is, I'm checking out. People who seemingly have everything, you see it all the time. And then the media reports everything that they have. I don't. So the one that sticks in my mind, because I didn't know this person, and I probably should have, according to this article, but Mick Jagger's girlfriend, I can't remember her name, but the article started out with everything that she had. She had her own, she was a fashion designer, had her own label, was still in her 50s, still strikingly beautiful, etc. And she was Mick Jagger's girlfriend. Had everything, and the article then was, kind of like, wow, what was the problem? She killed herself. So it happens all the time, doesn't it? Authentic unhappiness. So do this thought experiment now. If you were forced to choose, this, this mudra, right? I'm no diamond dealer, but I know I know the mudra. So if you are forced to choose between either being rich, beautiful, young, powerful, the three jewels of so I think the three jewels are being rich, beautiful, and powerful, probably, right, of the world. So you've got those. Oh, but did I mention you're suicidally depressed? Okay, you've got that. That's what. So that's your life, or you're older, have some gray hair, maybe a little overweight, maybe beginning to lose your memory a bit, maybe have no assets whatsoever, but are perfectly serenely contented. Let's just say very happy. Some, spontaneous bliss every now and then. Which are you going to choose? Is anybody going to choose young, beautiful, suicidally depressed? Not a one? Dude, it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, it's so obvious that if that is the choice, then that happiness, the hedonic, just doesn't even compare. I went in 2 years ago, well, almost 2 years ago, I was in Ladakh for 4 months, and in the most northern part of India. And I was 2 months in one particular place, and so in Leh. And anyway, I ended up at a teaching of the Ganden Tree Rinpoche, the highest ranking Gelugpa Lama, ranks higher than the Dalai Lama among the clerics. And so, throne holder of Jason-Kapa. So in a temple with about 400 Ladakis, I was the only pale face among them. And interestingly, the teaching that the Ganden Tree Rinpoche was doing was Delam, Path to Bliss. Text that I knew very well. And I had Geshe Michael's translation of it on my Kindle, in fact, while he was teaching. And all of the Geshes were quite astounded by that, because they were convinced that there had been no English translation of it. So anyway, I was one of the few people, aside from the Geshes, there maybe were 30 Geshes or so in the room, and all the rest were Ladakis. So it was only the 30 Geshes and I who knew what the Ganden Tree Rinpoche was saying, because I had my own translator, who was giving me real-time translations whispered into my ear as the Ganden Tree Rinpoche was doing his teaching. So this guy spoke, for Ladakhi, spoke very fluent English. And so I asked him, why is it that you speak such good English? And he said, I just came back from a year in the United States, where he was guest teacher at Columbia, South Carolina, in a center there. And I asked him about his experience, and he said, it's so fantastic. I miss my students so much. You Americans, you have such powerful enunciation. And I thought, what? What are you talking about? I have to go to Columbia or something. I don't get it. Americans with such powerful enunciation. And he said, yes, you all have so much, you have everything, and you're still so unhappy. And you know it. Ladakis don't have that. Ladakis are unhappy, but they think that if they had the standard of living of an American, then they would be happy. If they got the loan from the Indian government to open up a new business, buy a new car, open a guest house, then I'll be happy. But you Americans, you have it all, and you're still unhappy. I admire that. So we should make use of our unhappiness. We have been able to, what we should check off the list actually is hedonic pleasure. Tried that. It's a taxi ride around the block. I think I'll apply myself to something else. How about authentic happiness? The truth-given joy. So we are going to do some meditation, actually. Recognize and working in this cognitive dimension. You really want your friends to be authentically happy, don't you? People you love, don't you wish for them to be happy? To be free from suffering and to be happy. People we love, we have no problem wishing that for them. But do we actually wish that for ourselves? Do we, or have we given up on authentic happiness? So that's the question we are going to be investigating in meditation. What is my vision for authentic happiness? We're going to ask ourselves this question. What is my heart's desire? And then flesh that out a bit. Yeah, so that's probably all I need to say about that. So let's do take a quick break so that for those of you who need the restroom, so that you can do that, so that this won't be a distraction for you. And then the rest of us will prepare to meditate.
It's like $78,000 in the United States. We're the happiest person in the
Is that right?
Yeah.
Where's that research?
I read it every year.
Is that right?
They do it every year. It varies from country to country. In Bangladesh, significant correlation between unhappiness and $10,000. You get to 78, whether it's 78, 178, or 20 million, there's no correlation.
I think I have seen something like that also.
I'll go with that.
And that would be for a family of 3 or something like that.
Call, I'll just remember the number of it. We'll see what they seem to make sense.
And then, because I do remember seeing that, because below that there was the stress factor of mortgage and payments and things like
I mean,
that.
10,000 in New York, if you can't live on welfare, or you're homeless, especially if I'm homeless, but I mean, that's just there with the study.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to afford a studio anywhere in New York.
Again, it's a study, so people that have nothing incredibly happy, other end.
Right, because of the basic principle we're talking about.
Everything's set.
Yeah, it's just
You enjoying this weather?
yeah, it's nice. Yeah. I'm glad the winter finished. It was really cold. We moved to the loft.
So you did?
That was mostly windows and it's freezing.
No.
I've never been so cold inside a place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we tried to fix it. It didn't really work. So as soon as it changed, the body did something different. Like that wasn't like this. That was most of the winter.
No, I mean,
How are you? How are you?
Hector, you're headed to Nepal soon?
October. Yeah. We've got a crew there now.
Oh, do you?
We've got a crew of medics. Yeah, we've got a crew of medics we sent over early in the week. A few EMTs, some nurses, and we've got 2 Nepali doctors that we work with when we're there.
Have you heard any reports back from them?
Yeah, they just left for, you know, Geshe Tashi? He's the Umse from Saramay Monastery. So we used to work in his village, work with the kids there, and we visited a couple of times. So that village is destroyed. It's up in the mountains on the border with Tibet. So they called us. They walked 3 days from the village to call and ask for help. They got to Kathmandu. So within 3 days, we managed to put together a great crew. We had the money because we had already raised money to go and help them in October for a medical clinic. So we managed to pay for these 4 people, connect them with people on the ground there, translators and the rest. And they left the day before yesterday, but we haven't heard back from them. So they were going to go by road, then they had to stop because there were some landslides, get trekking all the material and all the supplies we sent to on the other side of the landslide, get another truck, and it was going to take a couple of days to get up there. So we're hoping to hear back from them. They'll probably come back in about 4 days, and then they're going to do a second trip.
Was there any communication from the village?
Yeah, so so people walked down from the village to communicate, and those people are now travelling back with them. But we've connected them with the emergency response people on the ground. So Kathmandu Airport is decked out with US Special Forces, with the Nepali group, with UN, with all the emergency response. So they're connected with that. They've done this before. The crew we sent, they've worked in Katrina and other places. Yeah. So we just paid for a bunch of really good professionals to go. And then we're raising money to, when we go in October, we can help them rebuild the schools and do all that stuff after the emergency is done. Yeah, it feels good. Yeah, but he had in that village, we had 7 people pass, a bunch injured that are still up there. And then the people in Kathmandu we work with, all of them are fine except one person was crushed by some building. Everyone else is fine, all the kids and all the orphanages and schools. And they were sleeping out on the street, but happy. They were happy. They recognized they were lucky. So they sent videos saying, "We are lucky." Yeah, so we should tell you like.
I haven't gone to it. I haven't been doing my
Is there a bell or something?
Yeah, we can do it. I was sitting on.
Yeah, so you can.
And it's all the people I was very lucky and lucky but then he sees as well, so it just reminds me of my magic.
Do you actually have a bell or?
Yeah, we do. I'll get it.
But it's the ones that are area spending so much time by myself, reading things, talking to them.
You have a choice.
And that's been there since I played.
How long have you been there? Till Monday. I think Tuesday. So for this meditation, you have a choice of using the supine position, where a number of you are set up on mats. So if you prefer to do that, go ahead. But I haven't given you the instruction yet for how to do that without falling asleep. So if you know how to do that, go ahead.
There's another mat just here at the front.
Albert Einstein said that. Albert Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand. So this meditation is going to be an exercise of the imagination. Most of what our meditations will be is dealing with the actual present moment experience. But this one is going to deal with potential, with a vision. So begin by closing your eyes or leaving your eyes open, whatever is your normal habit for meditation. And spending a moment, first of all, bringing your attention into the domain of your body. And there, give your full, bare attention to tactile sensations, meaning the sense of touch. It's very helpful to begin with the sensations of solidity and firmness where your body is contacting the floor. These are said to be expressions of the earth element and are a very grounding way to begin a meditation. It interrupts the mental chit-chat that we often bring to the start of a meditation. And now for a moment, just consider your life today. Are you a mere collection of random circumstances? Things that people did to you or for you? Or was there purpose that was very important for you getting to where you are right now? A sense of vision about what you wanted your life to be. If someone were to look at your life, just the way that you operate, what you do, how you spend your time, would they be able to infer or divine what this purpose is that has brought you to this point? Do you know what is your heart's desire? What is your vision for a life that is flourishing? Is there an animating purpose to what you do? To your goals? Bring this heart's desire to mind right now and visualize it clearly. Be bold in the belief that your imagination cannot possibly exceed your ability to create this life. Don't be limited. If you are fortunate enough on your deathbed to be able to look back at your life, what is it that would lead you to say, this was a life well lived? This meditation actually is a loving kindness meditation. The first of the four immeasurables. This is loving kindness for yourself. Can you wish for yourself the genuine happiness, the sense of flourishing that we wish for those people who are close to us? Now, with the in-breath, arouse this aspiration. May I be truly happy. May I experience, here and now, this vision of flourishing. And then with each out-breath, visualize from an orb of radiant white light at your heart, which is the emblem of your pristine awareness. Visualize a flood of radiant white light filling your body, saturating every cell. Eliminating the obstacles to your achievement of this heart's desire. With each in-breath, arouse that loving kindness for yourself. May I be truly happy. And feel that same warm-hearted affection that you would feel for your dearest friend. And then with each out-breath again, visualize from that pearl of radiant white light at your heart. Light flooding your body, eliminating every obstacle. In order to realize this heart's desire, you may need some extra resources from outside you. What would you love to receive from the world in order to actualize this vision? It could be tangible things, like more disposable income, a bigger apartment, a car, or it could be intangible things. Close friendships, world peace. What do you need from the outside as a support of your achieving this vision of your heart's desire? And then with each in-breath, visualize these things, these resources, everything that you need, nothing lacking, as a flood of white light entering you from outside, perhaps the inspiration of a teacher, light from the realms of the Buddhas. Everything you need flowing into you, entering your heart. And then again, see that on the exhalation, flood of white light from your heart, filling your body, eliminating every obstacle. With each in-breath, all the resources that you need, here and now, manifesting in support of your vision. And with each out-breath, that warmth and affection for yourself. May I be truly happy, saturating your body. In order to reach this vision of your heart's desire, you may also need some new inner resources. You may need to transform in ways that make this vision possible. There may be things to take up or to give up. Visualize clearly now the inner transformation necessary in order to achieve this heart's desire. And then with each in-breath, arouse the aspiration. May I truly transform in this way. And with each out-breath, again, visualize a flood of radiant white light from the orb at your heart, eliminating all obstacles to the achievement of your heart's desire. And now, because your happiness cannot possibly exist in isolation from the happiness of others around you, what would you love to give to the world? The gifts of your unique experience, background, your genius. What would be a fulfillment of purpose and meaning to give to the world, a gift? Visualize it clearly. And then with each out-breath, visualize that radiant white light from the orb at your heart, filling your body and then flooding out of every pore of your skin, delivering these gifts, unique, that only you could provide, becoming a cause and condition of happiness for others. And with each inhalation, arouse the aspiration. May all others, just like me, be happy, authentically happy, flourishing. And with each out-breath, deliver your contribution to that. And then release the visualization and simply rest with a calm, serene, peaceful mind, comfortable that this heart's desire is within reach, will become your everyday experience. So perhaps there was some discovery there of something, some audacious goal that you have not dared to dream of. Or maybe there was just nothing. There was, nothing that felt compelling. That's good knowledge to have also, that I don't have something right now that animates me, that a big, hairy, audacious goal. But I think we all recognize what a state of grace that is when we feel that purpose in our lives, that sense of purpose. What I think of as a sense of purpose that has the gravitational mass to pull all of your life's decisions in orbit around it. Just think, how easy everything is when that happens. All your decision making gets to be very simple. That does this thing that I'm considering support my heart's desire, or does it somehow throw up an impediment, interfere with it? And then it's all simple. There was one of the things that I'm really looking forward to developing with this Cultivating Emotional Balance program is what I know I've mentioned for a couple of years now, is a program of meditation for veterans with PTSD. And so last year I really began to lay some good groundwork for that. And Things I think are really going to, they're definitely going to move forward next year. But already some very interesting, gratifying experiences with that. And one of the things that is inescapable is that a large component of the suffering that veterans experience when they come home is that they feel this loss of purpose, that they just don't feel like they have a mission now. Their mission was so clear to them all the time that they were in the service or in the battle or in the war zone. And one writer who described this said that, who had done 5 tours in Afghanistan, said that all around the world there is a group of young men aged 17 to 21 who is looking for purpose in their lives. And when they go to battle, they find the methamphetamine of purpose. There's no experience in life like it. And when they come home, that methamphetamine of purpose, they realize the rest of their lives is going to be nothing but light beer. Big difference. And so that leads, and one of the things also that in discussions with veterans, one of the things after that life and death mission that they were on, with the methamphetamine of purpose, returning to this culture, this society that they had been giving their lives to defend, had seen people killed in defending our values, what they realize is how shallow our values actually are. Nothing but consumerism, the hedonic. And that throws them into a spin, not having this animating sense of purpose. So that's a big part of this project with PTSD, is to, first of all, supply that animating purpose again, to give them something, a goal, some meaning that has the gravitational mass to pull everything in your life around it. So if you are going to discover that, you know that it has to be your answer to that question, what is my heart's desire? And not somebody else's answer for you. That was not a quiz to which there was a right answer. And you may have supplied the right answer. This is, after all, the Dharma Center. Look at, we're surrounded by bodhisattvas. There's His Holiness. Did you look at His Holiness and say, what is the right answer? Of course, I want to be a bodhisattva. I want to develop bodhicitta. That may not have been your answer. That may have been somebody else's answer for you. And thinking, if you gave someone else's answer, could it possibly have the gravitational mass that's necessary? I don't think so. You have to discover your authentic answer to that question. And it's something that's going to be always developing also. What your answer next year will be different than it is, your answer next year will be different than it is today. Your answer today will be different than it was before you discovered Dharma, or whatever. I was going off to law school at one time. Thank God that changed, because the reason I was doing that, it was, I hate to confess how shallow the motivation was for that. But I have a different motivation these days. So the conative dimension, you're balancing the deficit or hyperactivity in the conative dimension, is something more than just wishful thinking. It could be that every year on December 30th you say, I am going to give up smoking. I desire to give up smoking, or I desire to lose 15 pounds, or I desire to practice yoga 3 times a week, etc. You know how it goes. You make it's not a resolution by any means. It's wishful thinking. It's like saying, I want to win the lottery, and then not even buying a ticket. Right? If you're going to win the lottery, you have to play. And if you are going to give up smoking, you have to do something more than just wish to give up smoking. So the conative is this progression from aspiration, because this is what all of the four immeasurables are, very importantly, are not emotions. Bodhicitta is not an emotion. Very clear in scriptures. Don't make that mistake, or you're going to get frustrated. I don't feel the love for all beings. What's going on? I'm failing, Hector. Isn't there a practice that you can give me? Isn't there another book that you have? You must have something on your shelf for me. So, because what I want is to feel the emotion of bodhicitta. But that's not it. It's an aspiration. May all beings be free from suffering. May they be truly happy. And that aspiration, all of the four immeasurables, all of the commentators are very clear. It starts with yourself. May I be truly happy. And that can be really difficult in this whacked out culture of ours. His Holiness recounts, and anybody who teaches the four immeasurables recounts the first time that I think it was Sharon Salzberg was with His Holiness and said, and they were talking about developing that four immeasurables and targeting first yourself. And His Holiness said, of course, we all think that everybody else is the problem, and because we have no problem loving ourselves, and see only our good qualities. And then among this group of Western teachers, they said, well, that isn't really the case in the West. That people actually, it's very common that people are afflicted with low self-esteem. They have a problem loving themselves, even wishing themselves to be happy. And His Holiness broke out laughing, thinking it was a joke. That's a good one. No, seriously. Like, oh, come on. Really? Huh. It was in the late 80s. I couldn't believe it. Now, what? People have a problem loving themselves and wishing themselves to be happy? So we should take some, stock and wonder about ourselves and feel, do I feel the same affection for myself, the same wish that I be happy, that I feel for the people that I love, my dear friends. So that's the part of the power of this practice. First of all, not only am I worthy of happiness, do I deserve happiness, but I wish it for myself with that deep affection. So that is part of cognitive balance. It's the very first fundamental step in the four immeasurables, wishing yourself to be authentically happy. To have that gravitational purpose that is going to pull everything else into orbit around it. Everything else then gets a lot easier because you stop working at cross purposes. Your desires actually become coherent. Right now it could be that some of the things that you like to do, the ways that you spend your time, activities, etc., you may realize some dissonance, that these actually are undermining your aspirations. So that's what cognitive balance is all about. Bringing everything into line, getting everything coherent, eliminating dissonance. And the way that you do that is, first of all, recognizing that answer for yourself. What is my heart's desire? and keep asking it until you come to some feeling, to have a purpose that has that gravitational mass. Because without it, everything can feel aimless and random. And with it, it feels like a life lived in state of grace. So, we'll talk a bit more about that. But tonight I also want to introduce the next dimension, the attentional dimension. How are you all doing? Are you with me for another 50 minutes, or do you need a break now? Okay. Yeah? Okay. And so there still is just the one restroom here, right? So the way to make that work really is if you need to use the restroom, just go use the restroom rather than wait for a break. Because obviously if we take a break, there are going to be 60 people lined up for the restroom. And so if people just kind of filter out as you need to use it, go ahead. So don't sit there and be uncomfortable. So now this is time-lapse view of your development. So now that you have got the cognitive dimension balanced, that you have eliminated the apathy, saying I'm genetically hardwired to be unhappy, or I have tried being happy and it hasn't worked, or I don't deserve to be happy. This is a big one for returning veterans, called moral injury. This is an element that I think this program is going to be particularly effective with that group. I don't deserve to be happy because of something I did to others, or something I failed to do. There was a child who was bleeding as I was scurrying for cover to advance my position. And I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. But I didn't. And it haunts me. I don't deserve to be happy. So we may have ourselves a cognitive imbalance that is some version of that, hopefully much diluted version of that. But in some way, I don't deserve to be happy. But we have taken care of that with the cognitive balance. And just, don't think that one time through the first of the four immeasurables and the first phase of the first immeasurable, that you will necessarily discover your heart's desire. Make that part of your practice, because this is part, the cognitive dimension is not a one-off deal. It is 1/4 of a well-rounded Buddhist Dharma diet. And if you're not working on this regularly on the cognitive dimension, you're going to be anemic. Your practice will be anemic. So it's motivation beginning with your big, hairy, audacious goal. What could be more hairy and more audacious than I am going to reach enlightenment? I am going to achieve my highest potential in order to benefit others. Because I know that's the only way I'm going to be able to benefit others. But if that's not your goal, if that's just the right answer, then that's meaningless. That's just cocktail conversation. You had a comment or question, Teddy?
Question. From what I understand with the four immeasurables, happiness and the causes of happiness is usually taught in relationship to the Pt1, and the keeping of the Pt1. Can you? I suppose the big, hairy, audacious goal would just bring a greater significance to that happiness that you're talking about. Can you speak about the role that the pratimoksha play with that first immeasurable and keeping that for yourself?
I could, but I think it would be a distraction right now, because where I want to go, actually, with the limited time that we have, is into the attentional balance right now. There will be, if you look at your schedule, and it might be helpful to actually have a look at your schedule. There will be a period of discussion at the end of each day, and that would be a time then to talk more about things that are a little more, far-ranging, perhaps. But it's an interesting question, but I think not germane at this point. Because where I want to go is, now that you have balanced cognitive deficit, now that you have balanced cognitive hyperactivity, and you have a goal that is going to pull all of your life's decisions basically in orbit around it, you need to develop attention next. This is why these 4 dimensions are arranged in a progression, a flow. So you need, for instance, to be able to give awareness moment to moment, to know whether the decision that you're about to make is actually another instance of dissonance, or that it actually is coherent and supportive of your big goal or not. So that requires, first of all, that you be able to attend to what it is that you're doing, to be aware of what's going on. Another reason that attention comes next is that if you are going to make any progress at all in the cognitive, balancing, being able to recognize delusion as delusion, to recognize projection as projection, to recognize emotional turmoil, to recognize the arising of mental affliction. If you're going to be able to do that, it requires attentional stability, because the only way that you can recognize those is in the present moment of perception. And so you have to have stable, vivid attention in order to be able to do that. So if you're going to be able to make progress in bringing those other 2 dimensions into balancing those, you first of all have to start with shamatha, with the developing of some stability and vividness, and voluntary control of that chattering, discursive mind. So I'd like to introduce a term now that I haven't used before, and that I haven't used here before. And that is, I used to talk about the ruminating mind, or oftentimes you hear it described as the discursive mind, meaning that chattering mind that is basically is the vehicle for our distractions. But there actually is a new term that I've coined. I can do that because I'm a writer. So I have coined a new term that I think is very descriptive and more precise. And that is the default wandering mind, rather than the ruminating mind, because the ruminating mind was kind of expanding that term within the psychological parlance that strictly means the past, obsessing about obsessive memories. But we want to be able to include the future, fantasies of the future also, as to be included in our description of the wandering mind. But I call it the default wandering mind because of some discoveries in neuroscience recently, using brain imaging, and the discovery that basically 50% of our waking thoughts are distracted. It's a little over 50%, even when we're focused on our tasks at work. And it really doesn't matter so much what you're doing. So this was all comes from an article published in Science magazine by two Harvard psychologists, Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert. And interestingly, the study was about how focused attention relates to happiness. So the first discovery was in this very ingenious experimental design of theirs, they were actually able to interrupt people all throughout the activities of their day, and this was done in all income groups, all occupational categories, in a lot of different countries. And they were able to basically interrupt people with a text message, and then ask them certain questions. When you heard that signal interrupting you, was your mind wandering or not? Was your mind focused on what you're doing at work? Was your mind focused on making love, etc.? Whatever you were doing at that moment, the question was, were you focused or were you distracted? And then, what was your reported happiness, etc.? So one of the basic findings was that roughly half the time the mind is wandering. We know as meditators that it's a lot more than that when we try to focus on the breath, for instance, because, hey, if it was only 50%, we'd be at level 3 of SHAMATA, right? But maybe we're not there yet. So we'll just take Killingsworth and Gilbert, for now, at 50%. So what they have discovered was that when the mind is wandering, it is engaging a particular network of neural pathways, a brain network, that actually is called, that neuroscientists are calling the default network. And this is the areas of the brain, a network of neural activity that is activated whenever the mind is not focused on a specific task. Whenever your mind is not on the breath, it is in this network. And they call it the default network because this is where the brain goes when it's at rest, when it is not focused on a particular thing. So this is interesting, isn't it? That this is actually the default state of the brain, and we are interrupting the default state, and we are trying to train ourselves with this selective focused attention. And this may explain why attention is not our default state, why it is something that has to be cultivated, why it has to be developed and trained. So, a couple of other things. One of the other interesting things, because I had asked this question a number of times in the last couple of years, and that is whether it's still true what the Lam Rim says, that there actually is a distinction. So the Lam Rim says that there is a distinction between excitation and distraction, with excitation being drawn away from your object to an alluring object, a desirable object, and distraction being either a neutral or a unpleasant object. And that the Lam Rim says that excitation will take us more frequently for longer periods of time than distraction will. So interestingly, that's what the neuroscience indicates also, that when we're distracted, it is more typically to a pleasant distraction rather than a unpleasant or neutral. So, because my question was, in these times of high anxiety, is our mind wandering more still to a pleasant distraction rather than to an anxious thought? So apparently still the answer is yes. Of course, we all have our specialties. Another thing was that a mind, when it is focused, is more happy than when it is wandering. People report diminished happiness when their mind is wandering. And this is true regardless of the task they are doing when their mind is wandering. This is really curious, because it seems like when we are doing something really unpleasant, let's think of the the least pleasant thing that you can think of. Right now, the image that comes to mind for me is using a pickaxe at Diamond Mountain trying to break caliche for a foundation of a retreat cabin. It's like breaking up concrete, and it leads to all kinds of joint injuries, and it's painful, and it's 110 degrees, etc. You get the picture. Okay. We all have some version of that. Think of the thing that you would least like to be doing right now. Wouldn't it seem natural that you would be happier if your mind drifted off from that to being under a palm tree at Riley Beach in Thailand? Seems like it, doesn't it? Don't we distract ourselves with a wandering mind, thinking that I'm going to think of some happy thought now and take my mind off this ugly task that I'm doing? Well, it's actually not the case. People, even if it's something very unpleasant task that you're doing, if you are focused on it, people report being more happy than when their mind is distracted away from it. So the attentional balance that we are trying to develop is about adding some voluntary control to this default wandering mind. I just have to say at the beginning, because otherwise I know there's going to be a comment. We are not trying to eliminate the default wandering mind by any means, because a lot of very valuable things happen while the mind is default wandering, and some not so helpful things also. But some of the helpful things are creative solutions often emerge. It's very helpful to be able to disengage from the here and now to think of possibilities, etc. We did that with the first meditation. So it's not something we're trying to eliminate. It's also very restful. That's where glucose is refeeds the attentional centers of the brain that are depleted by demanding tasks. If you're doing a spreadsheet, for instance, how long can you do that before your mind feels exhausted? The way to replenish that ability to focus selective attention again is to let the mind wander. That's one way. And really the most powerful way, research shows, to do that, to replenish your ability for focused attention, is with a task that is really absorbing but doesn't require selective attention. So, and they say, a walk in Central Park, being in nature. It just, because you are absorbed, but it's relaxed, it's easy. So what you're doing there is replenishing your ability. So that happens in the default wandering network. So good things, creative solutions, etc. We're not trying to eliminate it, but what we're trying to do is to develop some voluntary control of when we go there. In the world of shamatha, well, so first of all I should say that in the world of the 4 dimensions of mental balance, of course, we know that what we're dealing with is attentional imbalance. So the mind can be imbalanced in 3 ways. There can be an attentional deficit, there can be attentional hyperactivity, and there can be attentional dysfunction. So in terms that you're probably all familiar with, then terms from shamatha, meditation practice, an attentional deficit would be laxity, meaning that your attention, you don't have enough energy basically in your attentional system. And so you may have not heard what I just said because it's getting late, you're falling asleep, or you're bored. So all of those would be laxity, meaning that you're not brightly, vividly engaged with what you are hoping to attend to. The attentional hyperactivity imbalance is having too much energy in your attentional system. And it's helpful at the, as we'll begin to experience, to think of these as energetic balances, because that's really how can experience them, as too much energy or too little energy. And that can really help you to supply an antidote to the imbalance. But the hyperactivity is excitation and distraction. So that means you may not have heard what I just said because your mind was going off to what time is the subway closing, the L is shutting down, or is that right? The L or the G or something is shutting down at 11:30. Is this guy really going to go on until 11:30? Etc. So if your mind is going there, you didn't hear what I said. So that would have been a case of distraction because you didn't go to the palm trees of excitation and alluring. You might be thinking of the meal that you're going to have, when you finally get out of here, or something like that. So both of those are taking you away from your object. Then attentional dysfunction would be when the hyperactivity or the laxity or the deficit manifests in a way that takes you away from authentic happiness. Because this is what the balances are all intended to do, is to promote and support authentic happiness. And so the dysfunctions are manifestations, and this one is a little nebulous, but the others are much more kind of precise. They just lead to unhappiness, or the deficit or the hyperactivity lead to away from authentic happiness.
Doug, can you give a practical example of that third one?
So the hyperactivity being that, so the hyperactivity, so your attention is distracted. So you have a goal, for instance, of whatever your goal is, but you're constantly distracted. So the distractions are, the hyperactivity is leading away from what you recognized in your cognitive balance, for instance, would be leading to your happiness.
The dysfunction, attentional dysfunction.
Yeah, so that's basically, it's just the negative outcome of the hyperactivity or the deficit.
Like the fact that I putter aimlessly after I've checked my phone 50 times just before.
Yeah. So that would be, and especially if you decided that you wanted to be, your goal was to be less stressed at the end of the day. And you because I have told you before that every time that you check your phone and interrupt what you're doing, you're getting a shot of cortisol.
Yeah.
And that, because that's the alerting function of attention. So you get a slight amount of stimulation, which is very helpful when you're at the water hole and you hear a twig snap behind you and you're preparing for fight or flight. But that happens every time that you hear the ping sound or whatever your alarm is, and you are attending to something and you shift your attention to something else, you get a shot of cortisol. At the end of the day, you wonder, why am I so wired? I resolved not to have coffee after 2 o'clock because I can't sleep at night. I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I feel wound up and I can't get back to sleep until 4 o'clock. I have insomnia. Why is that? It's, one reason could be the cortisol poisoning, what I call it. And it's part of multitasking. So that would be an example of that. The hyperactivity, that you're distracted from what you're doing, is leading you away from your goal of having a good night's sleep. So now we can really get into the meditation instruction. the imbalances of both hyperactivity and laxity. So now at this point, we're just going to talk about excitation and laxity. Because these are the two imbalances. And now we're going to start talking more in terms of shamatha, because this is the way that we balance the imbalances is with the practice of, or the promotion of stability and vividness, which is the domain of shamatha meditation, the genre of practice. So to develop the balances, to balance these, what we have to do is develop these two very fundamental elements of shamatha, which are mindfulness and introspection. Or Geshe Michael calls that watchfulness. So mindfulness in the shamatha tradition, and actually so in Buddhism, in both the Pali and the Mahayana, refers to something different than what mindfulness means in 2015 America. So it is not, well, unless you're here at 3 Jewels, but it is not what is meant in the psychological literature when we talk about mindfulness-based cognitive behavior therapy, etc., or mindfulness, the way that it's used in mindfulness-based stress reduction, or in what Alan calls the modern Vipassana movement. In those cases, and so that accounts for about 95% of the uses of the term mindfulness in everyday parlance. The way that mindfulness is used there is in open judgmental, or not open presence, meaning non-judgmental presence. So open non-judgmental presence. That's what mindfulness means in the way that it's used in those instances, in those settings. But that's not what the Buddha meant by sati, and it is not what Buddhism and the shamatha tradition, but all of Buddhism, when that term sati is used, what it means is that it is your active present moment of attention focused on an object of your choice and sustained without forgetting. So sometimes it's just said that sati means recollection of your object. So the big difference there is that the mind training comes from choosing an object to place your attention on, and then constantly bringing your attention, when you discover that your attention has been distracted, just constantly bringing it back to your recollected object. So that's what mindfulness is. It's the mind training that occurs from choosing an object, not just being okay with whatever arises. There is we're going to be doing a practice that is very similar to that, but that's not a mindfulness. That's not what the Buddha meant by mindfulness. So the introspection, then, we have to develop both mindfulness and introspection to right these imbalances. So the introspection you can think of as the quality control report. What is the quality of my mindfulness? So am I distracted or am I lax? So it's giving you a report, the feedback on how you're doing in your meditation. And just to prime the pump, because this won't make sense until later, what the neuroscience shows is that it is probably the executive function of attention. So attention, in the way that cognitive science describes it, has several different qualities or attributes, and one of these is called the executive function of attention, and that's what appears to be the one that tells us whether we are on our object or not, and we'll talk more about why that's important for distraction. And so our introspection then is giving us reports of what Geshe Michael, in his metaphor, says is, are we staying on the road or not? Think of mindfulness as being, you're driving down the road, and you know that even if you are in Saskatchewan or South Dakota, and it's a straight line all the way to the horizon, if you just put the club on it, you know, that thing that you put on when you lock your car and leave it, if you just put that on so the steering wheel wouldn't turn, you know, straight line, you'd end up in one of the ditches, right? Because you have to keep making these micro adjustments, a little to the left, a little to the right, in order to be going in a straight line. You're getting, you know, just real-time feedback and making adjustments. So in the introspection then is telling you whether you are in the left ditch, which is excitation, and it's important that it's excitation in the left ditch because this is America. We'll talk about why that's important later. And laxity or dullness is in the right ditch. And so what you need to know whether you're in the left ditch or the right ditch. And you need to, we're going to be talking about the evolution of introspection and why that is so important to developing stability and vividness. It's as important as developing mindfulness. Your introspection has to evolve through several different stages in order to be able to give you faster and faster reports. First of all, you're not going to find out until long after it's happened that you're in the ditch. But we want to get reports quickly before they, you know, so we want to be able to add a rumble strip to the side of the road to let us know that we are about to leave the road to excitation or leave the road to laxity. Then, when you can do that, so you see the key, how key the introspection is to evolving to that point. And we'll talk about techniques for doing that, for evolving your introspection. So you could think of the J-Sankapa. So because I'm in the habit now of pronouncing the name differently than that, and I had to find out why it's so. Most of the world says Sankapa, and Geshe Michael, of course, says J-Sankapa. So why? I was always curious why. Why is there that difference? Is it one of them a dialect? But everybody, you know, Geshe Michael's so well informed. Why would he have a different pronunciation? So finally, I found out from a scholar that everyone says Sankapa, and that is the pronunciation, and that's what I'll be saying mostly, because that's the way it is. That's the correct pronunciation. But when you add the honorific J to it, that changes the meter of it, and then it would be which changes the pronunciation to J-Sankapa. But when it's pronounced that way, it doesn't make sense in the literal translation of Tsongkhapa, one from Tsongkha, the land of the onion. So it's Tsongkhapa. But when you add the J to it, then it becomes Tsongkhapa. So Tsongkhapa says that the whole point is that we are trying to make our minds serviceable. And that's the whole point of shamatha. And then, until we make our minds serviceable with shamatha, we don't have our minds have us. That must be a paraphrase. But anyway, the way that we go about that then is in the same way. You could say that an untrained mind is like an illiterate mind. That remember how your world changed when you learned to read. All of a sudden, a whole world opened up to you that was closed to you before that. You could still get around, and illiterate people still are able to function, hold down jobs in New York City. It'd be interesting to know. It would vary from borough to borough what the rate of illiteracy is, but it's high, surprisingly high. 14% average in the United States.
I
And
think it's 16%.
is it more?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I said that in Detroit when I was teaching, and a college instructor said, no, I don't believe that. So he went back and did the research, and he said, oh my God, I came back and found out that in the city of Detroit, it's 49%. Yeah. So, anyway, obviously the point is that you can think of an illiterate mind as being like a mind that doesn't have stable, vivid attention. You can still get around. You can still operate. A lot of people do. The proof is that a lot of people in New York City do it. And it's shocking to think that maybe 1 out of 3 people that you run into on the street is at least functionally illiterate. But when you do, so I doubt that there's anybody in this room that can't read. But think of the world that has opened up to you because of that. It's the same with making your mind serviceable to shamatha. When you learn to read, you have a choice. You have acquired a skill. Then you have a choice of what to do with it. You can either read the back of a cereal box, or read quantum cosmology, or Lamrim Chenmo, or Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, or something. You have a choice of what to do with that skill. So it's the same with shamatha. We're making our minds serviceable, and we are going to then employ it in a particular way because of our cognitive balance has given direction. What are we going to choose to read? Something that leads towards my heart's desire, no doubt, because it has that gravitational mass to make decisions about what I read also. So once you begin to pay attention to the activities of your mind, you begin to realize how much of your experience is actually default wandering. You are either wandering off to the future or off to the past. And that, as we said, can be helpful, can be beneficial. But when there is a memory that won't leave you alone, especially just think of anger. This happened in retreat, in this last retreat. There was a moment of anger, and it threw this person off for 2 days. They couldn't think of anything in meditation. We were doing 16 gatikas a day. 16 gatikas obsessing about this moment when someone got angry with this person. But it's like that, it happens all the time, right? Someone is angry or they criticize you, and then you just replay that in a loop. You don't have any choice. It's intrusive. It just keeps playing over and over and over and over again. And you'd like to say, thank you very much, I got the message. I don't think I'm learning anything more from hearing this the 100th time. 1 time would have been sufficient. But do you have voluntary control of it? Turning it off. So that's what we want to do. What we would like to do is to have at least the same degree of control of our minds that we have over our cell phones. They have an off switch, or a mute switch. So think what it would be like if you went to say the New York Philharmonic, and there was no mute switch, no off switch on cell phones. And it was just, standard etiquette was that you got a call, and of course you take it. Oh yeah, I'm here at the Philharmonic. Yeah, oh it's cool, yeah, oh, Yeah, well, that first chair violin, not quite up to what I was expecting. I think maybe it's really a stand-in tonight. Yeah, and it's not La Scala. No, I don't know what's going on, but yeah, the acoustics, of course, are great, you know? But I don't know, you know, and if you were doing that, everyone else was doing it, what kind of experience would that be? Thank God there's an off switch, right? Well, isn't that exactly what we're doing, though, while we're sitting there at the Philharmonic and thinking the same thing? That chattery mind is just going on and on, having a conversation, what you're going to tell your friend about your experience, etc. Going off to, or what it was that got you to come to this, you know, who you were trying to impress. This date isn't working out so well after all, and on and on, you know. Your mind can be totally distracted. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to give full attention to the present moment of experience, voluntarily? To be able to use that, the conceptual mind and the ruminating mind, and the default wandering mind, when it's valuable, and then just to use it like a power tool, turn it off when it's not serviceable, when it is leading you away from your authentic happiness, and be done with it. Have a mute switch for it. So the promise is that we can do that. And the way that we do that, so how do you do that? The strategy for developing that mute switch takes advantage of one fundamental fact about our human minds, and that is that we can only be attending to one thing at a time. It may seem like you can multitask, but that is an illusion, and you pay a high price for that illusion, which we won't go into. But it can seem like you can do several things at once, but it's because you actually are shifting your attention with blinding speed. It can be, you know, so the Abhidharma says 64, or sometimes I hear 65, but 64 moments of what? Karmic ripenings, basically, Abhidharma says, in a finger snap. So modern cognitive science actually says almost the same. Says it takes about 20 milliseconds for what's described as an ascertaining moment of cognition. So that's 50 per second. So blinding fast, that you actually can theoretically shift from one ascertaining moment to another. You know. So that's what toggling, Geshe Michael's term, toggling. You shift very, very quickly from one thing to another. And it can seem that because you are shifting so fast that you're able to do them simultaneously, but you're not. So, because we can only attend to one thing at a time, the strategy is that we are going to develop is that we are going to choose the thing to attend to. And that is not going to be the default wandering mind. We are going to choose something to attend to. And then the whole training is to sustain our attention on that chosen object. And there are a lot of sub-strategies that go into that. The first of these is recognizing what is the absolutely essential quality of single-pointed focus.
Awareness.
Well, yeah.
You're relaxed.
It's that one. It's to relax. So both are right answers, but the one I'm looking for right now is relaxation. You know, think of so the unbalanced effort is we think of, so this mudra for concentration, you know, furrowed brow. It's that unbalanced effort. It's extremely fatiguing. It feels like when you do that, it feels like an isometric, doesn't it? Like a mental isometric. You're pushing against an unmovable object till your arm starts to tremor, and then finally your ears start smoking and you just give up in fatigue. And if that's your approach to developing constant single-pointed focus, you're not going to enjoy it, and two, you're probably going to think of something more enjoyable to do. You're going to give up. You're not going to achieve much of a result at all. So you can either try the stern dad approach or the drill sergeant approach, and that is just be constantly lecturing yourself. Get back to that object. You kids, shut up. I'm sick and tired of hearing that over and over and over again, etc. So you can try that. And it didn't work with your kids, and it isn't going to work with your mind either for training it. The key to single-pointed concentration is relaxation. And in this culture, in our global 21st century consumer culture, it may require some remedial relaxation. Because New York City, my God, you have to be an outsider to appreciate it. I mean, to appreciate this about New York City. Because you're so immersed in it, it's like the water that the fish is swimming in. But it's the constant arousal. Everywhere, all day long. It's just arouse, stimulation, stimulation, stimulation. And so, you can very easily get into the habit of that the moment the alarm goes off, it's just a race. It's arousing, what do I have to do to get out of the house, etc. And then it is just a race all day long. And if you're beginning to flag, caffeine is the answer, or whatever, and then you just keep at it. And if you're feeling bored, or if you have, so this is the typical one, isn't it? If you have 6 minutes before your next appointment, what you do is that you would just consult your device and see, either the sports score, the Facebook post, check email, whatever. It's more and more stimulation. So now with our constant connectivity to the web, you see this even in northern India. You see old ladies in traditional dress who are carrying fodder on their backs, going to feed the cows, that has a ring in its nose and is tied to a stake. You couldn't think of a more medieval looking scene, except for the fact that she's on her cell phone. It's everywhere in India, at least. So we may need to do some remedial relaxation and recognize that this is all in support. You need to be able to do this to relax in order to develop single-pointed concentration. And the farther and farther you go along in the practices of developing shamatha, and I tell you, especially when you get to these awareness practices, developing awareness, merging mind and space, you need to be extremely relaxed. And the nuances of relaxation, it's like the 50 or the 100 words for snow in Eskimos. There are 100 nuances that you can begin to experience of relaxation, and how each of those correlates to stillness of awareness and a deepening of the stillness or the spaciousness of awareness. So relaxation is very, very key. And then the last thing, I had hoped to actually move on to the first of our meditations tonight, but I don't want to keep you beyond 9:30. But the key to this then is not just relaxation, because we all do know how to relax, even if we only do it once a day, and that being finally when our head hits the pillow. We all do know how to experience clarity, because that's really what we have all day long as we're racing through the city. Our minds can be brilliantly clear. What we have to do is to balance that relaxation and clarity. And what our habit is going to be when we begin tomorrow to experience meditation in Shavasana, the most relaxed of all the asana positions, is that you may just fall asleep, because that is your habit. You associate deep relaxation with dullness, with falling asleep, because that finally, when your head hits the pillow after 16 hours of stimulation and arousal, it's, please Lord, put me to sleep quickly, instantly. Don't let me wake up in the middle of the night. Give me the magic bullet. So we associate that deep relaxation with falling asleep. So tomorrow we will begin to, first of all, work with that balance of relaxation and maintain clarity as you begin to do that. That is beginning to feel a lot like flow, what a performer feels like when on those exceptional nights, when they are both simultaneously deeply relaxed and vividly clear. So we'll leave it at that for tonight. I hope you can come back tomorrow, because tomorrow, just a bit of a preview, we will begin with the focus on developing selective focused attention on the breath, and why the breath is the best object, and why Tsongkhapa actually says the breath is the best object. That ought to raise some eyebrows. The breath is the best object to still the default wandering mind. And then we'll work on a development of several different stages of breath meditation. And then we will work up to and end the day with this very new, what I call awareness of the breath. So we move from selective focused attention to awareness of the breath. And this then is how you can develop stillness of awareness as a standalone quality before we on Sunday then move into using that stillness of awareness to enter the Padmasambhava practice of taking the mind as the path, and what all of that opens up. So it's it'll be a wonderful day of meditation. And on your schedule you will see, so I have to thank 3 Jewels for providing the long days, because 8 hours a day. This is I've been doing this, I started doing this, what I call an urban retreat in Singapore 2 years ago or so, and it's really caught on since then. Because the thing that we can do in this, that I can't do in a 4.5-hour workshop, is actually spend a good deal of time meditating. So tomorrow there will be ample time for meditation. There will be all told about 6 gatikas, 6 24-minute sessions. And 3 of those will be unguided silent. So you'll have a chance to really begin to develop this as your own practice, then, the instructions. So I'll be doing both guided meditation, so there'll be periods of instruction, then there will be guided meditation, and then there will be periods of silent gatikas, 24-minute sessions also. So there'll be more of a complete urban retreat experience over the weekend, and not me just sitting up here yakking at you. So until then, have a very good night, sleep well, catch up on your rest so that you can be vividly clear tomorrow.
Thank you.